Well, Thomas Jefferson once wrote that architecture is my delight, and putting up and pulling down is one of my favorite amusements. Well, the truth is that Jefferson had a lot of delights. He was fascinated by the arts, the sciences, culture, history, music, just about everything. The main thing that Jefferson loved was learning. And so, when he was 17 years old, he entered the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg. Now today, we go to Colonial Williamsburg and we look at the buildings and we think, oh, they're so quaint and they're so lovely. But to Jefferson, they were rude, misshapen piles, and that they could be mistaken for brick kilns. Well, it was at William and Mary where Jefferson first purchased his first book about architecture. It was by Andrea Palladio. He was an Italian architect who lived from 1508 to 1580. Now, Palladio studied classic architecture of Greece and Rome and adapted them to his own style. His influence across Europe can be seen even today. And Jefferson once even stated that Palladio should be one's Bible for architecture. Now, while at William and Mary, Jefferson started to design his own buildings. And here we see some early examples. This was for a chapel. Of course, this was never built. This was one of his early designs. But you can see it's octagonal. You can see the seating. You can see the pulpit is in the center. Now, this was supposed to be an extension to the governor's palace. Again, this was never constructed. And this was for an addition to the college. And actually, the foundation for this building was laid. But because of the Revolutionary War, it never got any farther beyond the foundation. Now, during the Revolutionary War, that Jefferson served as the governor of Virginia and also as a representative to the Continental Congress. And it was also at this time that he built Monticello. Well, this may not look like the Monticello you're used to seeing if you've ever been there or looked at the picture on the back of a nickel. This was his first design for Monticello, and it was actually constructed. And you can see that it's rectangular, and it also has a double portico right there. You can see the two porticos, and on the other side there's also a double portico. And it does have the Jefferson octagonal projections on either side as well. Well, at the end of the war, Jefferson was appointed Minister of France, and he succeeded Benjamin Franklin at that post. And it was here in Paris that he marveled at French modern architecture. These are some examples. And one building he absolutely loved was called the Hotel de Sambre, I guess, because the H is silent in French. And at his construction, he would go down to the Tuileries every day, and he would watch them constructing this building. Now, another building he loved was a public market, a grain market. It featured a very large dome. This is called the Hall au Bled, B-L-E-D, the Hall au Bled. And its construction design fascinated him. This is the exterior of it. Now, later on in life, Jefferson was mentored to several young men who wanted to be architects. Jefferson was America's first architect, but he was not America's first professional architect. But those first professionals, like Robert Mills and Benjamin Latrobe, they were professionals. And Latrobe was hired to design the Basilica in Baltimore. I don't know if any of you have ever been to that, but it's a beautiful building. Well, Jefferson advised Latrobe about this building, and he told him to construct it with the same design as this one that you're seeing here. And so you can, when you go there, you can't actually see the construction because it's all ornamented, but that is Jefferson's influence on the Basilica in Baltimore. Now, it was while he was in Paris that Jefferson received a commission to design the Virginia state capitol. He consulted with a local architect in Paris named Charles-Louis Clerisot, who was very knowledgeable about classical architecture. And this was the design they come up with. Now, Jefferson used this temple as one of his models. This is in Nîmes, France. It's called the Maison Carrée. And he didn't see it in person at the time, but he saw drawings of it. And he also used other Greek temples as his model as well for the state capitol, but this was the main influence. And so this was what the capitol looked like after it was first finished, shortly after it was finished. Going back to the Maison Carrée for a second, he did finally get to visit it later in his life, and he said he would stand there gazing at it lovingly as someone would gaze at a mistress. But anyway, so this is what the Capitol looks like today, after many renovations. Now, when Jefferson left France after 4 years, he started tearing down his first Monticello. And it was using his newfound sensibilities that he designed a new house. This is an early drawing that was made by a woman who visited Jefferson during that time. And because he was busy serving his country in this period of his life, he was Secretary of State, he was Vice President, and finally President. It took him 28 years to finish the house. And in fact, it probably wasn't actually finished. He probably died before he could, because he always wanted to keep working on it. He always loved tinkering. And as he said, as I mentioned at the beginning, he loved putting up and pulling down. So he saw architecture as being malleable. Now, this is the floor plan of the house as it exists today. Jefferson left some of the original house standing, so if we zoom in, and you see the shaded areas here. Those are the original portions of the house. The unshaded areas are the new portions. And you'll also be able to see the different shapes that he used for the rooms. And if you look at the wide corners, that's just because they minimized dark spaces from the perpendicular design to have 120 degrees with an octagonal form. Also, a feature that was missing was the grand staircase. Now, it was a fashion at the time to have a grand staircase in a house. But to Jefferson, that was a symbol of extravagance and of the aristocracy. And so, because he was an egalitarian after the Revolution, this is what his stairwells were like. They were very narrow and small and very functional. Now, I could get into a lot of the details of the house, but I'll just show you a quick tour through some of the rooms of the house. This is the dining room, and if you've been there, they'll show you, you remember seeing the dumbwaiter. That was one of Jefferson's own innovations, was to add the dumbwaiter so the food could be sent up from below. This was his bedroom, and you notice there's an alcove bed. This was something that Jefferson loved. He thought that it was good for health. And he was a tall person, and you wonder, well, if he was tall, how could he lie down? He didn't. He liked to sleep propped up on pillows. He said that it was better for breathing that way. Okay, this is looking through the hallway, through Jefferson's study, out to the piazza. And this is the entrance hall, looking down from above. This is, when you take a tour, this is the first thing you see when you walk inside. Sorry, I need some more water. And this is the dome room. It's a panoramic view of the dome room, which is an octagon. This did not used to be open to the public. At the time I took this, I had to get special permission to go in there and get this picture. But it is now part of a tour that you can take if you were able to go up the stairs, because there are no ramps up there. But it is open to the public now. And then this is his study with his famous carousel of books and his writing machine where he could make copies of his own letters as he wrote them out. And finally, this is on the end of the building, which is a greenhouse. He called it his orangery. But this is also semi-octagonal. Now moving outside, this is the east front. Now, Monticello, there is no front and there's no back. There are two fronts. You have an east front and a west front. And if you look closely, you can see the dome right there. And this is another angle of the east front. This is inside the portico of the east front, and with the clock, and if you've been there, you've seen the weights on the inside that work the clock, and they go down through the floor, down into the basement. And these are just some of the more of the house from the exterior. Again, notice the wide corner. That's not a right angle. And these things, I think they're called dentils. Normally you wouldn't see those unless you got up close and looked at them, but he liked them. They were an ornamentation. This is the orangery you saw from before. And now this is the west front, the side that's the famous side. That's also from inside the west front. This is actually two pictures stitched together. I don't know how well you can see it, but if you look closely, it's stitched together right about there. But that's a nice side view. And then this is the more popular image that we see, the more familiar image that we see. Now, when Jefferson lived in Washington with his various duties he had over the years, he had influence over more than just the government. There were two competitions that were held while he was there. One was a competition for a design of the President's house. Another was for a design of the Congress, for the Capitol. So he submitted to the competitions anonymously under a pseudonym so that his name wouldn't influence any decisions. So this was his design for the Capitol. And so if you look closely, you can see House of Representatives, Senate, Court of Justice, passages to stairs, and hard to make what that one says. It's too damaged. And this was his design for the President's house. And this is what it would have looked like on the outside. Now, what would you think now? It probably wouldn't be called the White House, but this was his design, and it very well could have become what we now know as the White House. But it was not, it didn't win the competition. But it was based on this design. Now, this is a Palladio design. This was called the Villa Rotonda. And now, neither of those designs for the Capitol or for the President's house were built. But anyway, Jefferson loved this design, and if you look at his papers and his drawings, you see many variations of this throughout the decades of his life. Now here are some other designs that he created. This is an extension to a house called Farmington. It's just west of Charlottesville. You know where the Farmington Country Club is. This is part of the clubhouse now. But at the time, this was a plantation. And this is Barbersville. This was designed for Governor Barber of Virginia, and it's now in ruins. It burned down in the 1880s. But this was Jefferson's original design for it. Now, the dome did not get built. It was never constructed, but it would have looked a lot better, I'm sure. And he also designed several courthouses. Now, the thing with Jefferson and courthouses was he created a master design. And from this design, it was sent around to different jurisdictions, and people could make variations on it, and from the same plan. And this went around to several different counties around the state. So this is Buckingham. Now, this is not the original structure. It burnt down, but they did rebuild it to the original design. This is the Charlotte Courthouse, Charlotte County. There's Charlotte Courthouse and there's Charlotte. The town of Charlotte Courthouse. And so this is his design. And one thing, if you look, I don't know how easy it is to see in this light. Right there's a bell hanging. Now, back in those days, a courthouse was used not just for court proceedings, but also as a gathering place for the community. When there was an important announcement, a bell would ring and people would gather and they'd find out what was going on. And normally, a design for this would have a cupola where the bell would be hung. Well, Jefferson didn't like cupolas, so they had to come up with creative ways to put a bell in Jefferson's courthouses. And this was what their solution was, to have it inside the portico. And now we're just going to see some of the different designs that Jefferson has made so we can see what some of his attributes were of what makes Jeffersonian architecture. Now, Jefferson, as I mentioned before, loved octagons. And the reason for this was twofold. First, it approximated a circle, which is considered the pure design. And also because it had the wide corners, so you didn't lose a lot of light in the perpendicular corners that we're used to. Well, Palladio never used octagons or octagonal forms. This was purely Jefferson's idea. So he was not a strict Palladian, but he did adhere to Palladio in a lot of things. So he would cut them in half. Here's another one where you see an octagonal room. And this is Farmington that I showed you. You saw the exterior of Farmington earlier. You can see there are two octagonal forms, so it's an elongated octagon. This was Jefferson's design for surgery, a medical surgery theater, that was what it was called, at the University of Virginia. And this actually was constructed, and it was torn down in the 1930s. Yes, the University of Virginia destroyed one of Jefferson's creations. One thing that you can't tell from the picture is that the floor is sloped, so that the seating there around the edges, they slope down, and in the center, you would watch the doctor performing surgery. And the circles in the corners, those are stairwells, spiral staircases. This stood about where Alderman Library is today. There's another design of his for a very small house. But again, you see the octagon. And again, most of these were never built. Some of them, Jefferson did design some houses at, I think, Edge Hill and Edgemont that were either torn down or were changed, altered a lot. Oh, at Woodbury Forest. I don't know if any of you have heard of that private school called Woodbury Forest. I believe it's in Orange County. That was a Jefferson design, but it's also been changed. Well, let's go back to the first image that we saw here in this collection. And we don't know what this design was intended for, but you can see how much variation there was in the shapes of the room. And you have the circle in the middle, and you have an ellipse down here, and you have a semi-octagon right there, and an octagon with a square end attached. So Jefferson loved playing with the different shapes. Now, when he retired from public life at the end of his presidential term, he was eagerly looking forward to life as a private citizen. In fact, he said he was looking forward to leaving the hated profession of politics. Well, 3 years before his presidency ended, he started building a second home in Bedford County, just outside of Lynchburg. The estate was called Poplar Forest. He acquired this through his wife when he got married to her. It was the wedding present from his father-in-law. And this is the floor plan, and look again, you see the octagon. And this here is a portico, and this is another portico, and these are stairwells, spiral staircases. And then these are the alcove beds, here and here. And then this was the entrance off the front at the north. And the center room, this one, is a perfect cube of 20-foot dimensions. And you'll see later, there's a picture of a skylight. Because this room is enclosed, there are no windows, they had to put in the skylight. Now, as for the landscape design, yes, Jefferson designed landscapes as well. You see the house at the center of a 50-foot circle. There's the house right there. And on the either side of the house, he's on the east side, he had a wing. He called it a wing of offices. Offices back then didn't mean what it means today, where you sit at a desk and work. This was just meant offices for various kinds of work, one of which was a kitchen, but it was right there. And then on the other side was just a row of trees. And then their circles here are two mounds. They're just made of dirt. The dirt came from the sunken lawn right here. And there's also lined with trees. So you have a circle of trees, and lines of trees, and rows of trees. And so this was a very pleasing, aesthetic, symmetrical design for the landscape. And at the north, this is the carriage turnaround. Now, up until recently, if you went there, you would have seen boxwoods. You'll see a picture later of the boxwoods. Those were not Jeffersonian, those were later. They have since been torn down. There's the boxwoods right there. Those boxwoods are no longer there. So I'm just showing you some views of the house. The railing, he called that a Chinese, no, I'm sorry, the Chinese railing is up above the skylight. That's not a Chinese railing. That is the entrance. This is this is the roof of what he called the wing of offices. And of course the railing is modern. There's no way you could have that today and have it legal without the railing. And Jefferson said that he loved going out in the evening and strolling out with the bats and the owls. Very springtime view of it. And this is the skylight in the center cube room. And late in his life, when he became too feeble to go visit Poplar Forest, his nephew was living there, and it leaked horribly. And in the last letter that his nephew ever wrote to him, he was complaining about how terrible it was leaking. He said the plaster was falling off the walls. It was so bad. But Jefferson died before he got a chance to respond to it. But today it's got nice, modern, rubbery sealant, so it doesn't leak anymore. This is a view from, I think, the west. This is an octagonal outhouse. There were two of them on either side, just on the opposite sides of the mounds. And then this is the view from the south, looking north. And you can see the wing off to the right there. Oh, it cycled back somehow, okay. I don't know why it cycled back. But it's nice to look at them again, isn't it? Okay. By this time, Jefferson was in his 70s, and he still had one last architectural project to oversee. With the approval of the state legislature, he began working on his academical village for the University of Virginia. Now, up to this time, universities were housed in a single building, but Jefferson saw problems with that, so his vision for the university had many more practical applications. Here's his original plan to have 4 parallel rows of buildings, all connected by a covered passageway. The inner row, that's called the lawn, and is punctuated by buildings called pavilions, which are numbered. And these were intended for dual use as classrooms and as for housing for professors. Student rooms were in between each of the pavilions. And they're still there to this day. You have to have a very good academic record to be able to live on the lawn. Now the outer rows, there and there, those are called ranges. So you have the lawn and you have the ranges. And the ranges were also for student housing, but in between the student housing were buildings called hotels. And these hotels were dining rooms. Now, in between the lawn and the ranges, here's another view, were some gardens. These are all gardens. See, this is one of the ranges here, and then this is the lawn here. So the ranges, let's see. Oh, the gardens, and they were bound by these famous serpentine walls. A lot of people like to think that Jefferson invented the serpentine wall, but he didn't. They were around a lot longer before him. And then there was the rotunda to anchor it from the lawn. My voice is getting dry. Jefferson's inspiration for this was the Pantheon in Rome. Now I'm going to show you some pictures around the University of Virginia. This is one of the ranges, and this is one of the hotels right there. He also has this arcade. There's the arcade. I believe that is on the east, yeah, that's the East Range there. That's another view of the East Range. They look alike, so it could be the West Range. This is another one of the hotels. And yet another hotel. And again, notice that the design is different. They're not all identical. Now we move to the lawn. These are 2 of the pavilions. I believe those are numbered 2 and 4. And the head of the School of Architecture told me once that he had a guest visiting from Europe to come and see this. And he was astounded. He said, this is all wrong. They're all supposed to be identical, but they're different. Well, the reason Jefferson made the pavilions different is because he wanted each of the pavilions to be a different style of architecture so that they would be objects of study for the students. There's another pavilion. And to this day, they are still used as housing for professors. Notice the different style of the columns there. A nice view looking down the lawn. Now this one is different. Jefferson did not design this. Remember I mentioned earlier an architect named Latrobe, Benjamin Henry Latrobe, who designed the Basilica in Baltimore. He submitted this to Jefferson, and Jefferson loved it so much that he incorporated it. This is a very French style. It's not Palladian, it's not neoclassical, except for the columns. But Jefferson loved the French design. This is what it was based upon. This is in France. I can't remember the name of the actual building, but likely Jefferson saw this while he was in Paris. This is looking up, you see the curved portico inside this one. Now, Jefferson didn't design it, but it does reflect his vision because he liked it, so he incorporated it. Now, this is Pavilion 10, back there. If you go there today, it doesn't look like this anymore. Since I took this picture, they have changed it in 2 ways. One is that the columns are no longer painted white. They're a sand color. that's true to Jefferson's time. In Jefferson's day, the columns were made of brick, and then they were covered with some sort of a plaster, and so they had a sandy color. If you looked at the pictures of Poplar Forest, they have the columns that way. So the sand-colored columns were authentic to Jefferson's time, and that's how they restored Pavilion 10. There's also, I think somebody called it an attic, but up above the roof line now, there is a board. It's just a rectangular board up there. That also has been figured out that was the way Jefferson designed it. So this particular pavilion has changed since I took this picture. Now we're going to look at some pictures of the rotunda. This is the side facing the lawn. I really like the angles, the way the lines come together in this view. And then you have the rotunda behind it. Looking up at the Corinthian capitals on the columns there. It's a very handsome building. Nighttime view. Another nighttime view. And at Christmas. Now this side of the building, this is the side that faces University Avenue on the north. Jefferson did not design this. Originally, this side was flat, and after Jefferson died, one of his proteges, Robert Mills, designed what they called an annex that came out from this side, and it had classrooms in it. Well, in I believe it was 1896, if I'm not mistaken, the rotunda burned down and the annex went along with it, completely to the ground. It was a complete loss. So they wanted to rebuild, but they did not rebuild the annex. Instead, they got architectural firm Mead, White, and McKim from New York City. And so when they rebuilt the rotunda, this was designed by Stanford White, famous architect. So this was his tribute to Jefferson on the north side. So this is not Jefferson's design, but it is in homage to Jefferson. And so this concludes my talk. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But there are no questions. Oh yeah, there's a question back there.
I have visited Poplar Forest, and unlike Monticello with waiters, there seemed to be no way to get food from the kitchen to the dining room. So I understand you had to go through the bedroom to do that?
Yes, that's true. The question was about at Poplar Forest, there was no way to get from the kitchen to the dining room. So yes, the servants, the slaves, I guess, would have to come up the stairwell and bring the food up in the stairwell through one of the bedrooms into the central dining room. That is correct.
So are you saying that when he was 70 years old, my age, ready to retire,
Yeah.
he decides to design non-major pavilions, 120 classroom, student rooms, and the rotunda?
It was an ambitious undertaking for somebody 70 years
And when
old.
the rotunda burned down, I understand it took 7 architectural firms to rebuild.
Oh, I had not heard that. Yeah.
And he did it by himself.
7 architectural firms to rebuild okay, I believe it. He was quite a man. He was a genius. There's a famous quote that John F. Kennedy once said where he was hosting a dinner of Nobel laureates at the White House. And he said, "This is the greatest collection of minds in the White House since Thomas Jefferson dined here alone." Yes?
Why the infatuation with railing at roof's edge? Where did that come from?
I think it was just an ornamentation that he liked. It's just an aesthetic choice that he made. I don't think anybody would actually be rambling around up there to keep somebody from falling over.
Santa Claus.
It just looks nice.
He didn't like to, I know he didn't like to have second stories, that he thought they were pretentious. And
Right.
so he used to hide them, but put them behind.
That's exactly right. He used to make his presentations to have of 2 stories to look like 1 story. Although Poplar Forest on the south side, you do have the double portico, 1 portico elevated upon another. Well, it's actually, no, it's not 2 porticos, it's an arcade below and elevated on. But around the side, the front, yes, you only see 1 presentation. Yes?
I understand the reason Monticello wasn't completed is because he kept on tearing it apart, building it, tearing it apart, even though he was totally broke. Although broke is much too kind of word.
Yes, he was very much in debt.
He was a great businessman. Economically, he was not too bad.
Right. But he grew tobacco, which he hated because it ruined the soil. He would much rather have grown wheat, but it was so profitable that he needed the income from tobacco. So he kept growing tobacco even though it ruined the soil. Yes?
I just want to mention that the gardens that he showed there at the University of Virginia have all been restored by the Garden Club of Virginia. And they also, I understand, I haven't seen it yet, that carriage circle in front of Poplar Forest, they completely put it back the way it was.
Yes, they've restored the gardens at UVA and they have restored the carriage turnaround area to Jefferson today.
And then I just recently read that the serpentine walls were really cheaper than the straight ones because it was only 1 brick thick.
Yeah, the serpentine walls added strength to it, so they lasted longer. You didn't need to use as many courses of brick through it. Yes?
He went to Warm Springs, and he said it might cure the disease you had, but if you took 2 baths in there, you get more disease, particularly boils.
Oh.
He was quite upset with another disease he caught in Warm Springs. He didn't like swimming there very much.
No, he didn't like swimming very much. His favorite activity was horseback riding. And even into his 80s, he would horseback ride every day. All right, if there are no more questions, I do have a display of books up here. You're welcome to come and take a look at them. There have been a lot written about Jefferson's architecture and his other interests in the arts. Just be careful, mind the cables that are on the floor here. Careful not to trip over them.
Very good.